Hello and welcome to IB Times TV. I'm Leanna Brinder, business editor for the International Business Times. Joining me now is one of the world's most prominent whistleblowing attorneys. His name's Ruben Gutman and he's a director at Grant and Eisenhofer. So hi, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, you've worked on some many multi-billion dollar cases, and particularly in the pharmaceuticals industry, and even more interestingly, about GSK. We all know about what's going on in China at the moment with the alleged GSK bribery scandal over there. Do you think what's happened with GSK is only the tip of the iceberg in that environment?
Absolutely. I think that if I was to speculate, I would say that more is going to come out over the next couple of months and certainly over the next couple of years. The notion that pharmaceutical companies, whether it's GSK or Abbott or Pfizer, pay doctors either through direct compensation or through in-kind compensation, dinners, speaking fees, to get them to write prescriptions or to get them to perform a service that is of economic value to the company is something that we've seen in the United States. That it goes on in China, and it involves, for example, doctors who may be working for the Chinese government, that is foreign officials, that may be acts prescribed by our Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, is not something that's shocking to me. So I think that what you're hearing about with regard to GSK, at least in terms of the allegations, and obviously they have a right to a defense and and to come forward with the facts that support whatever their defense is, I think that that is the tip of the iceberg. These companies have at least 3,000 drug trials going on in China. And so this is an issue that is going to have a global impact on consumers who use our pharmaceuticals, because we want to make sure that those tests are done with integrity and that the doctors who are participating in the administration of the drug trials are doing so to determine whether the drugs actually work, what their safety and efficacy are, what the downsides are, the detriments are to using those drugs, the side effects. And so we need integrity in those trials. And if there's any monetary compensation or any in-kind compensation that is tainting the trials, that's going to have a global concern.
Well, in the US, I mean, how are they viewing this in terms of what could potentially happen, as you said, how it's going to filter back to the consumer, especially if all those trials are being done over there?
It's not clear to me that the impact of this, or the potential impact of this has been fully evaluated. That's why it's going to be very, very interesting to watch. I think that in the first instance, U.S. at least reporters and analysts are looking at the notion that the Chinese actually are taking enforcement activity. In China, there's a lot of substantive law. For example, we have in China, they have discrimination laws, they have tax laws, they have environmental laws. But what is different in China, for example, than UK and the US, is that the enforcement mechanisms are not the same. So there's and enforcement is really a critical element of the legal process. So the idea that the enforcement authorities in China are taking a very serious look at this and taking enforcement action, that in some respects is the story that's getting the most notice. The actual substantive impact on consumers and on the market is at least, it's critically important, but at least as far as the analysts are concerned, unfortunately, it's secondary at this point.
Well, you have and are still spending some time in China, and you're going there again soon on an academic basis. So can you tell me about maybe areas where they're looking to either tighten up supervision or areas that even in code of practice that they're looking to tighten up a bit?
Sure. I mean, well, economics drive. There are obviously cultural differences between the Western part of the world and China, but economics are the equalizer. They're the norm. And I was in China in February as part of a team of Emory University professors who were training prosecutors in Shanghai on the investigation and prosecution of insider trading cases under their securities laws. And there's this notion that the Chinese actually have to take compliance enforcement actions with regard to securities violations if they want capital coming into their markets. They have to have some integrity to their markets. And by the same token, there are Chinese investors who are doing business in the U.S. market. So there's a genuine concern that they are going to engage in at least the self-regulation that's going to keep them out of the watchful eye of the Securities and Exchange Commission or whistleblowers in the United States. So they want to know what the substantive law is. You know, in the area of pharmaceuticals, right, there's a ton of U.S. and Western pharmaceutical companies, from Glaxo to Abbott to Pfizer, that are now doing drug trials in China and are trying to market their products in China. And the Chinese, I think, realize, at least as far as the trials are concerned, that there's got to be some integrity to those trials. Otherwise, there's going to be a backlash if the regulators in UK or, for example, the United States find out that there was a lack of integrity of the trials and there are problems with the drugs. So at least there are economic and consumer drivers that are causing the Chinese to engage in enforcement compliance of substantive laws, and that is critically important.
And do you see, I suppose, rounding off, we were talking about a lot of the media are focusing on the fact that the authorities there have been very vocal and almost inaudibly transparent in terms of when they've decided to charge someone, what's going on at the moment, just to try and show that they're putting out some enforcement there. But do you see this as a turning point in terms of the culture and supervision of the pharmaceutical sector, or do you reckon it's just going to revert back to the way it's always been? Well,
it's interesting. I mean, we have a lot of students in China at some of the major universities, Beidai and Tsinghua and Jiaotong University, and they come to Emory Law School, and they are learning about the Western rule of law, and they see that as a norm that promotes economic activity. So as the younger generation gets exposed to the rule of law as it exists in the UK or US, you can't help but think that China will be changing dramatically. And as, again, we live in a global economy. Chinese have very attenuated supply chains. Right? Those supply chains, for example, that supply Walmart, will not work if the products that are sold in Walmart stores are, for example, contaminated with lead paint or the product of radioactive metal. And so the Chinese recognize that there's got to be some integrity to the supply chains. So economic drivers, at the end, can't help but change things. So I don't think it's a question of reverting back, because these economic drivers won't change. They'll only increase transparency. They'll increase civil enforcement, at least, of standards.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And that was Ruben Gutman. He's a director at Grant & Eisenhofer.